Peter Schiff recently went outside at Walmart and asked a bunch of individuals who were most likely Democrats and progressives, would you be willing to support paying Walmart employees higher prices but at the same time, or higher wages, but the only catch is that you have to pay 15% more? That was the scenario, and Peter Schiff said that since that policy is not there, why don't you donate 15% of the purchases that you made? And everybody said no. And once Peter Schiff uploaded this on YouTube, this created a firestorm among many progressives, and he even got death threats. And I thought to myself, like, why would people wish ill will upon Peter Schiff, especially when he made a fantastic point? I mean, you know that some progressives, and you could even say some right wing and libertarians, are a bit cuckoo, right? There's like the 10 to 20% that are just nuts of the population, whether you're right, left, libertarian, whatever. But all of a sudden, he started to get death threats. I mean, that made no sense. And if you look at the minimum wage argument, he totally makes sense. And let's look at what Thomas Sowell had to say about the minimum wage. And now here's an argument made by Thomas Sowell, Professor Thomas Sowell. He's at Stanford University, libertarian economist. And this title is called Minimum Wage Madness. This is over at townhall.com. Political crusades for raising the minimum wage are back again. Advocates of minimum wage laws often give themselves credit for being more compassionate towards the poor, but they seldom bother to check what are the actual consequences of such laws. And let's go to the third paragraph or fourth paragraph here. Most nations today have minimum wage laws, but they have not always had them. Unemployment rates have been very much lower in places and times when there were no minimum wage laws. Switzerland is one of the few nations without a minimum wage. In 2003, The Economist magazine noted or reported Switzerland's unemployment neared a 5% high of 3.9% in February. In February of this year, Switzerland's unemployment rate was 3.1%. A recent issue of The Economist showed Switzerland's unemployment rate as 2.1%. Most Americans today never have seen unemployment rates that low. However, there was a time when there was no federal minimum wage law in the United States. The last time was during the Coolidge administration, when the annual unemployment rate got as low as 1.8%. When Hong Kong was a British colony, it had no minimum wage. In 1991, its unemployment rate was under 2%. As for being compassionate toward the poor, this assumes that there is some enduring class Americans who are poor in some meaningful sense, and that there is something compassionate about reducing their chances of getting a job. And then he just goes on and on and on that the poor in this country have a lot more than you would say in other countries. So that's something to note. So he says that the poor are better off than other countries as well. But let's just see this paragraph here. Most Americans living below the government-set poverty line have a washer and or a dryer as well as a computer. More than 80% have air conditioning. More than 80% also have both a landline and a cell phone. Nearly all have television and a refrigerator. Most Americans living below the official poverty line also own a motor vehicle and have more living space than the average European. Not Europeans in poverty, the average European. Right? So they have a better living expense. Let's just go on in a different paragraph. In European welfare states where minimum wages and mandated job benefits to be paid for the employers are more generous than the United States, unemployment rates for younger workers are often 20% or higher, even when there's no recession. And he goes on to the last two paragraphs. Minorities like young people can also be priced out of jobs. In the U.S., the last year in which black unemployment rate was lower than white unemployment rate, 1930, was also the last year when there was no federal minimum wage law. Inflation in the 1940s raised the pay of even unskilled workers above the minimum wage set in 1938. Economically, it was the same as if there was no minimum wage law by the late 1940s. In 1948, the rate of 16-year-old blacks and 17-year-old males was 9.4%. This was a fraction of what it would become in even the most prosperous years from 1958 on, as the minimum wage was raised repeatedly to keep up with inflation. Some compassion for the poor. So, this is what many progressives don't understand. They say that we need to raise the minimum wage in order to help the poor out, and this will help them get up the economic ladder. But if you look at this, having more government intervention will simply exacerbate the problem. The problem is that you have a Federal Reserve System that continues to debase the currency. We have had a depreciation of 97% of the dollar over the last 100 years. Not to mention that the US government subsidizes vital markets, such as the home loan market. You want to look at another market, you could look at housing, you could look at the medical industry as well. And because of these subsidies, you have to pay more in prices compared to what you did back in the day. And now it takes two incomes to raise a family. So basically, when you have the government screwing up these markets, and they say that, hey, you need to help out these individuals by raising the minimum wage, those with unskilled professions, right? You had a socialist that was elected in Seattle saying that people should be paid $15 an hour. What's going to happen then? They're going to move their shop to a different state or out of the country. This is what these guys who are progressives don't seem to understand. Even Max Kaiser, of all people, say that the minimum wage should be $15 an hour. You do that, the businesses will act in their own interest. And as a result, guess what? There will be less jobs in that area. So this is something to note. And it's really surprising to see Peter Schiff getting death threats over a simple economic concept. You learned this in Econ 101. You raise the minimum wage, guess what? There are less jobs out there. People, unfortunately, don't seem to understand that. And not to pick on progressives, but if you make an argument that goes against their vision and they don't have a response, they resort to these childish tactics. Don't get me wrong, there's some guys in our camp, the libertarian camp, that act like this as well. So it's wrong across the board, but just I've seen it before. These union guys, these guys who are hardcore leftists, they just resort to name calling. This goes on and on when they cannot come up with a way to debate you. And sometimes they do these videos in anger and in a lot of, I don't know, they just seem to be really angry and frustrated with a lot of things, and then they just take it out on guys like Schiff. They do videos on him. It makes like no sense. Like, you're doing nothing to yourself if you're making these angry videos directed towards Schiff, towards these other guys as well. I mean, just do something productive. That's a message to you guys out there, all you cynical people. So, just to note, once again, the minimum wage, raising it, will absolutely do nothing. It's actually going to create less jobs. More jobs are going to go overseas, or you're going to see jobs move across state lines. Alright guys, I'll talk to you another time, guys. See ya.